This is part 2 of the series Eunuchs, the Deep State of Rome. We are going through the individual examples where the eunuchs influenced the history of the Roman Empire through their power and status with the emperors. Whoever took power did not matter. Emperors always had eunuchs and had to deal with them. It came with the job. Eunuchs would be around for multiple emperors. Their influence grew outside just loyalty to a specific emperor. That is why I compare them to the modern-day deep state. They outlast the individuals who happen to wear the purple and claim to be emperor. The eunuchs at other times had the power to decide generals. Here is another snippet from Book 2. The defense of the East against the arms of Sapor required and would have exercised the ability of the most consummate general. And it seemed fortunate for the state that it was the actual providence of the brave Ursinus, who alone deserved the confidence of the soldiers and people. In the hour of danger, Ursinus was removed from his station by the intrigues of the eunuchs, and the military command of the East was bestowed by the same influence on Sabinian, a wealthy and subtle veteran who had attained the infirmities without acquiring the experience of age. It was even within the power of the eunuchs to try and decide who would be the pope. Pope Liberius, as long as he maintained his station and his principles, was guided by the warm attachment of a great people, and could reject with scorn the prayers, the menaces, and the obligations of a heretical prince. When the eunuchs had secretly pronounced the exile of Liberius, the well-grounded apprehension of a tumult engaged them to the utmost precaution in the execution of the sentence. The capital was invested on every side, and the prefect was commanded to seize the person of the bishop, either by stratagem or by force. The order was obeyed, and Liberius, with the greatest difficulty, in the hour of midnight, was swiftly conveyed beyond the reach of the Roman people, before their consternation turned into rage. As soon as they were informed of his banishment into Thrace, a general assembly was convened, and the clergy of Rome bound themselves, by a public and solemn oath, never to desert their bishop, never to acknowledge the usurper Felix, who, by the influence of the eunuchs, had been irregularly chosen and consecrated within the walls of a profane palace. The power of the eunuchs was real, and their consequences on the average person who lived in the Roman Empire was felt as well. The successors of Constantinus had expressed, in a concise but lively manner, some of the theological calamities which affected the empire, and more especially the East. In the reign of a prince who was the slave of his own passions and of those of his eunuchs, many were imprisoned and persecuted and driven into exile. Whole troops of those who styled heretics were massacred, particularly at Cyzicus and at Samosata, in Paphlagonia, Bithynia, and Galatia, and in many other provinces. Towns and villages were laid waste and utterly destroyed. The centralization of wealth and power around the eunuchs were also a drain on the system, as is the case with all centralization of political power. The reformation of the imperial court was one of the first and most necessary acts of the government of Julian. Soon after his entrance into the palace of Constantinople, he had occasion for the service of a barber. An officer, magnificently dressed, immediately presented himself. "It is a barber," exclaimed the prince, with affected surprise, "that I want, not a receiver general of the finances." He questioned the man concerning the profits of his employment, and was informed that besides a large salary and some valuable prerequisites, he enjoyed a daily allowance for 20 servants and as many horses. 1,000 barbers, 1,000 cupbearers, 1,000 cooks were distributed in the several offices of luxury, and the number of eunuchs could be compared only with the insects on a summer's day. The monarch, who resigned to his subjects the superiority of merit and virtue, was distinguished by the oppressive magnificence of his dress, his table, his buildings, and his train. The stately palaces erected by Constantine and his sons were decorated with many colored marbles and ornaments of massy gold. The most exquisite dainties were procured to gratify their pride rather than their taste. Birds of the most distant climates, fish from the most remote seas, fruits out of their natural season, winter roses and summer snows. The domestic crowd of the palace surpassed the expense of the legions. Yet the smallest part of this costly magnitude was subservience to the use or even to the splendor of the throne. The monarch was disgraced, and the people were injured by the creation and sale of an infinite number of obscure and even titular employments, and the most worthless of mankind might purchase the privilege of being maintained, without the necessity for labor, from the public revenue. The waste of an enormous household, the increase of fees and prerequisites, which were soon claimed as a lawful debt, and the bribes which were extorted from those who feared their enemy or solicited their favor, suddenly enriched these haughty menials. They abused their fortune without considering their past or their future condition, and their rapine and venality could be equaled only by the extravagance of their dissipations. Their silken robes were embroidered with gold, their tables were served with delicacy and profusion, the houses which they built for their own use would have covered the farm of an ancient consul, and the most honorable citizens were obliged to dismount from their horses and respectfully to salute a eunuch whom they met on the public highway. The luxury of the palace excited the contempt and indignation of Julian, who usually slept on the ground, who yielded with reluctance to the indispensable calls of nature, and who placed his vanity not in emulating, but in despising the pomp of royalty.